Good morning, LA301 students. This would be for sections 1, 2, and 3. What I wanted to do is, in lieu of missing class today, and my apologies for that, as my car decided it didn't want to make it up the mountain this morning. Anyways, I thought I would do a couple things here. First, to just restate that your first writing assignment is due September 24th at 9 a.m. So that would be prior to the very first section of class that day. I would ask that you please make sure to get the paper submitted by that time. I do have this set to allow submissions after that time, but I do get a notification that it was late. So please get the paper in prior to 9 a.m. on September 24th. What I'm going to do is I'm going to post a couple videos here. This first one I'm going to try to make it a bit short, just to kind of summarize what it is that you really need to include in this paper. These were things that we were going to cover in class today, but again, due to us not meeting face-to-face, I felt the need to post a video here. So really, Chapters 2 and 3 are really about summarizing and quoting. And what Chapter 2 really teaches you is how to write an extended version of what they say. So the authors are trying to explain what a summary is, and this may help you to understand the difference between a summary and a paraphrase. This chapter also kind of gives you strategies for writing summaries, kind of playing what the authors call the believing game, and then also keeping your own argument in mind as you choose what points you want to focus on. So these are kind of some of the main things that the authors in the big picture are covering and trying to attempt in this chapter. One of the things I want to focus on here, if we can go back to the example I gave last week in class, when I mentioned about thinking of writing as engaging in a conversation. I gave the example of that party and you walking into a party. What I want you to do now is I want you to pretend that you're a friend. You're already there in the party and one of your friends comes in. So as a good friend, one of the things that you want to do is that you want to help your friend get caught up on the conversation. So you can't really pause the conversation and kind of give word for word, what has happened up to that point. But what you're doing is you're summarizing for your friend who just came in what's going on in kind of a succinct way to try to make sure that your friend has some better knowledge of the topic at that point. So really, if you can think of the summary process as that, you're really succinctly trying to capture the ideas, not word for word. One of the things that the authors point out here is, and this is a tendency, and I see this a great deal in trying to summarize, is this what they call list summaries. The book gives some good examples of list summaries on pages 35 and 36. And basically, I'm going to read a bit to you here. So this advice, and this is taken right out of the book on page 35, to summarize authors in light of your own arguments may seem painfully obvious. Okay? But writers often summarize a given author on one issue even though their text actually focuses on another. To avoid this problem, you need to make sure that your they say and I say are well matched. In fact, aligning what they say with what you say is a good thing to work on when revising what you've written. Often, writers who summarize without regard to their own interests fall prey, here it is, to what might be called list summaries. Summaries that simply inventory the author's various points, but fail to focus those points around any larger overall claim. So if you've ever heard a talk in which the points were connected only by words like, then, also, in addition, you'll know how such lists can put listeners to sleep in a sense. So here it is. The author says many different things about his subject. First he says, then he makes the point that, in addition he says, and then he writes, also he shows that, and then he says, this is what we really want to try to avoid here, because it is boring, because it's not easy to read, and it gets very monotonous. So the point of this chapter, really, one, trying to avoid those list summaries. They can be dangerous in writing in terms of putting your reader to sleep and not doing well on the paper altogether. So in order to effectively summarize, we want to make sure we avoid those list summaries. Okay. The other thing to mention here, and it's very important, is making sure that your summaries are understood. You're making sure you understand what the point of the author is, and re-emphasizing that point clearly. The other thing that I'll focus on here briefly is you can see this in pages 38, 39, and into 40, is it really using appropriate language for summarizing your author, and they give some really good examples here. So basically this is all about using stronger language, because rarely do authors simply state, or they said, or they did this, but they, and this is taken right from examples on page 39. So using these verbs that really get to the actions and emotions of the author. Okay, so words like, Smith argued, Smith insisted, he believed, Smith acknowledged or praised, endorsed. These are all good examples of verbs. So one of the things I want you to do for this paper, your first paper that's due next week, is use some of these verbs when you're describing what Murray is stating. Use some of these verbs. Okay, he complained that, he questioned. Use these verbs to really get at what Murray is trying to get at, because again, we want to try to capture the emotion of the author, and we want to convey that to our readers. I want to move on to kind of go over chapter 3 a bit now. So I spent a few minutes there covering some basics of chapter 2. Read through the chapter, and then I'm going to, in another video, give you some work to do to kind of tie this all together with Murray. This was going to be what we did in class today again. So chapter 3 is all about, as he himself puts it, the art of quoting. And really, the main emphasis here is that it's trying to introduce you to the strategy of quoting what others are saying. What the authors are warning you against here is that quoting too little or too much can hurt your argument. And that it's important to frame any quotations, meaning you can't just have quotations thrown into your paper without framing them, with kind of introducing them and then putting the quotation and then exiting out of it. They give this a reference or analogy of a quotation sandwich, and I'll post that up in an announcement with a little description about that in a little bit. I think that'll work better if I do it that way. So really trying to offer you some tips for finding relevant quotes, and that's really important, that you want to use these quotes in two ways, really, to kind of to highlight some of the points of your summarization, so going back to chapter 2, and then in addition to that, using quotes to really strengthen your argument, your points that you're making in your paper. So if you can keep those two things in mind as you're quoting, again, just to state that again, using quotes to kind of to emphasize the summary points, and then using quotes to really strengthen your arguments or your points that you want to make in your paper. So you could state, an opinion or something that you believe, and then bring in a quotation that backs what you believe or your opinion. It's always very helpful in academic writing. Okay, so you'll see this these terms, dangling quotations and hit and run quotations, and they give us some nice kind of visuals of this in chapter 3. And really, this is just just kind of terms to avoid when you're using quotations in your paper. So you don't want quotations just to throw one in and then not either introduce it or explain it, but just throw it into your paper. So you really want to think of this quotation sandwich where, you know, the top of the bun is the introduction to the quote. Okay, and then the meat and all that stuff in the sandwich in the middle that makes the sandwich what it is the quotation itself, and then the bottom bun would be kind of wrapping up the quotation and then exiting out of there. Okay, so that's really important to think about with these quotations. And you know, note there's a nice visual with this hit and run. Don't be a hit and run quoter that's on page 45. I think that's a good visual there. And then there's some explanation of the quotation sandwich on page 46. And then this chapter really gives some nice examples of how to introduce quotations with some templates. So there are templates on page 46 for introducing quotations in general, and then there are templates on 47 for explaining these quotations. Okay. So here I'll give an example with each. So X, and this is for introducing quotations in general. X states not all students should be banned from sports. Going over to the explanation quotation templates, basically X is warning that the proposed solution will only make the problem worse. Okay, so read through this chapter and really pick up on those kind of main points there. You don't want to just throw a quote into your paper, and you want to introduce it, have the quote, and then give a little summary or a little exiting explanation of the quote, and then that's it. So really with paper 2, I want you to focus on, we're back here now, you write an essay based on the prompt number 2, page 254. The essay needs to be 3 to 5 pages in length, summarizing the author's ideas using paraphrases and quotations. So this is where chapters 2 and 3 come in, and indicating whether you agree or disagree with the author's conclusions. So remember to include at least 2 of the templates from the textbook. This can be from chapters 1, 2, or 3, but you need to include 2 of those. And then also, I'm going to state it here because it's not spelled out here, make sure you use some of those action verbs that were presented to us in chapter 2 in the summarizing chapter. And that's all I have for now. I'll post another video a little bit later. I'll put some information up about the quotation sandwich and explain that a little bit more. And that's it. Take care.